Hello and welcome, friends, colleagues, visionaries, and of course, those who are listening on Spotify and Amazon Music. I'm happy to have you here at Xraised, where knowledge meets inspiration in the intricate dance of industry evolution. Today's episode, oh, it's a treat, especially if you've ever looked at an opportunity and immediately heard your inner voice scream, too risky. Well, we're about to have a conversation that might just teach that voice to sit down and zip it. Now, let me tell you about today's guest. Imagine someone who's navigated Wall Street, launched a preschool group in Singapore, founded a hedge fund, and now leads executives through deeply personal reinventions. I would say that's not a LinkedIn fantasy. That's our guest's real life resume. He's a board director, executive coach, global investor, and the author of Breaking the Glass Ceiling, an insider memoir where he lays bare the gritty and inspiring story of overcoming setbacks as an immigrant, pivoting from pain to purpose, and transforming adversity into rocket fuel for greatness. Whether he's guiding a C suite executive to lead with heart or helping a high achiever find meaning beyond metrics, his work is about making risk less scary and far more strategic. So here he is, the founder and coach behind Institute for Greatness, Anthony Te. Hey, Anthony, welcome back to X Raced.
Hi, Miles. Thank you for the introduction.
You're welcome, as always. And it's always a pleasure to have you here. Every time you join us, Anthony, the conversation hits deeper, it gets sharper, and leaves us thinking for days. This time, we're dialing into something you live and breathe: risk taking, and more importantly, how to help people actually embrace it, not just admire it from afar with a mix of envy and anxiety. So let's crack this open. You've often spoken about how risk can be reframed into opportunity, and I love that
hmm
idea. But for someone who's naturally risk averse, even hearing the word risk can trigger a cold sweat. So, what's the first mindset shift they need to make to start seeing risk as something empowering rather than paralyzing?
Firstly, it's not that there's certain people who perceive risk as risk. Actually, everybody is by definition risk averse because that is just in our human nature since the caveman days, right? So I think it's important to take a step back to kind of understand why risk causes people to feel paralyzed. Because the way I define risk is uncertainty about a future outcome. People may define it differently, but I think that's a pretty common definition. And so, like, for example, actually, every day we're all faced with risks, but we just don't think about it. Like going to work, there could be an earthquake, there could be an asteroid, there could be whatever, right? But we don't, it doesn't paralyze us because we're just so, we know the probability of that is very low and it's a very routine thing, right? And so there's risk actually all around us. But then there are certain things that we're not familiar with where then we feel that, oh, this risk could lead to failure. It'll make me feel insecure and uncomfortable. So naturally, our brain would just have this red alert. It's like flashing red light when we think of it that way.
Yeah.
So, and it's normal again, because this is about survival, evolution and survival of the fittest. It was because of how we were programmed back in the caveman days. That's why we're able to survive to today, right? Because like any risk back in the days could mean life and death. You could be eaten by an animal or whatever, right? So it's totally normal for people to be risk averse. So how do we reframe risk to be something more empowering, rather than paralyzing? So there are a few things to kind of reprogram our mindset. And so the first thing I think it's important to ask ourselves, what is the purpose behind taking a risk? Because it cannot be blind risk. Then we have to also reprogram ourselves to think that, okay, well, nobody likes discomfort. But if discomfort is the path to growth, while failure is the path to breakthrough, then we actually associate something positive with risk rather than something negative with risk. And so it's only by taking a risk can we transform ourselves to be a
Uh-huh.
better person. So in a sense, like if you can draw yourself, like draw a scenario where, let's say
Yeah.
on Miles, you're transformed, what would
Mhm.
that Miles look like? And then once you're at that transformed state, how would you rate yourself from 1 to 10? Like, how would you feel, Miles, once you're transformed? And you
Yeah.
say, oh, I'm going to give myself an 8 or 9. I would say, well, how does it feel now to take a risk so you can feel like you're at a 9?
Uh-huh.
So it's really about, again, disassociating risk with flashing red lights
Mhm.
rather than it's risk with something much better. And then also one thing that's also important is to kind of like visualize that, oh, there's a lot of uncertainty in taking risk, which is why people are afraid. But if you can visualize a path to getting to the destination, which is
Mhm.
being transformed, then then a lot of uncertainty goes away. So then
Yeah.
again, the risk is actually not as jarring as it seems on the surface. So
Uh-huh.
I would say these are just very, very high level ways of reframing risk from something negative to more positive.
Mhm.
And so just based on what I said, right? So if I ask you now, Miles, hey, you're going to be totally transformed if you do this, even though it could seem like a risk because you're uncertain about the future. How would you feel? Do you feel more empowered?
Well, I should be.
I can see you
And
doing it.
and that's such a grounded way to look at it. And you're right, there are risks everywhere around us in each corner we go to. It's just a matter of how we reframe, as you said, and deal with them, right?
Yep, that's right. That's right. Of
Mhm.
course, it's a journey.
Yes.
It's not a moment, right? It's a
Uh,
process. It's a journey to reframe something like that. So it takes
uh,
time. But I
yeah.
would say, yeah, that's generally the very high level uh, way of doing that.
Right. It's almost this like risk isn't this wild beast to tame, but more like something that needs better management. It's about control and not avoidance, right?
Yeah, it can be practiced. Yeah, so if you avoid it,
Right.
you don't practice it, then you always feel risk is a bad thing. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's something. It's like a muscle that you can train in your brain.
Muscle. I like that. Now
Yeah.
we're also familiar, Anthony. You've taken some pretty bold leaps yourself, from finance to education, from hedge funds to coaching. It's like a zigzag most people would be too terrified to follow. So I'm curious, how did you evaluate whether a risk was worth taking back then? And when you coach others now, how do you help them build that same decision-making muscle?
Yes, that muscle. I like that, huh? Well,
Yeah.
firstly, is we need to understand risk versus calculated risk. Again, it's not like blind risk, right? If you can calculate something, it's a lot easier for you to embrace that.
Mhm.
So again, calculated risk. I'll talk more about this later. Then there's something that is that's essential, which is what we call like cost benefit analysis or risk reward, right?
Mhm.
Like
I remember.
by giving up this, what do I gain? Right? Because in
Yeah.
life, everything, and naturally, again, our brain is programmed that we have limited resources, limited energy, limited time.
Mhm.
So if I commit to A, I may have to give up on B.
Yes.
So I think about, okay, is it worth it to take a risk on A and give up on B? And actually, this phenomenon, it's you can actually see it in animals. Like if you look at like the big five, they're in Africa hunting.
Yeah.
The animals feel the same way. Where like if it's a cheetah trying to go after an antelope, they were actually in their mind process like, oh, there's so many out there that I need to hunt and eat. But
Mhm.
then if I take the risk to run after one of them and that one gets away, then I'm going to go hungry and then I'm going to miss out on hunting for all the other prey. So actually, this is a very natural process of risk reward. Even animals think about it all the
Mhm.
time.
Yeah, it's
And
natural.
so, yeah. And so I think the first thing is then you need to also understand what we call risk versus a mitigant, right? It's
Okay.
okay that there's risk. The concern is that you don't even know what the risks are. But if I told you like you're going to drive down this road, even though it's very curvy, but you know exactly where the curves are
Mhm.
or like where the roadblocks are,
Mhm.
then you can actually you can expect them to come, expect what's to come, and then you can mitigate them.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So let me give you a like a you know my personal experience, right? Of say starting the preschool, for example,
Yeah.
and then the hedge fund, for example, right? So like actually in both scenarios, it was just for me, I said, okay, yes, it is a risk because I'm uncertain about a future outcome. But
Uh-huh.
the same, it's just as going to work. I am uncertain about a future outcome when I go to work for somebody else.
Mhm.
But in this case, is what I know for certain are positives, which is I will learn a lot. It'll
Yeah.
put me in a different league, and it'll just transform me as a person. So that I know is 100% certainty. The
Mhm.
next thing then is, okay, let's say I rate myself now. This is, say, my dream life. I've already kind of imagined that in my mind. How important is living my dream life according to my definition of a dream life? So let's say I give myself a 9. So
Okay.
again, this is something I am 100% certain already before I take the risk.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then the question is, okay, what are what we call like for me is then okay, I know there's certain risks that could happen by pursuing or even in the process of achieving this 9 out of 10 my dream life or certainty of transforming myself. Then what I do is, okay, is it worth it, right, to give something up to achieve my dream life, which is a 9 out of 10?
Yeah.
So that is the risk versus the reward. I see what the reward is already.
Mm-hmm.
Then I just need to say, okay, is it worth it with the risk? And so it's different for everybody, and this is why sometimes there's a term called risk appetite.
Mm-hmm.
Like your risk appetite, my risk appetite, and somebody else's risk appetite is different. But it's like eating spicy food. Like some
Mhm.
people just have an appetite for spiciness.
Yeah.
But again, that can also be trained over time. The more spicy foods you eat, the more you're able to build up
Yeah.
that
The
appetite.
more you get used to it.
Yeah. And then one last thing in terms of risk reward, when I talk about calculated risk, is that I am able to quantify that risk because
Mm.
a lot of it is okay, let's say I know that for sure I'm going to give up like a steady income, right? This is X dollars over X period of time. So for sure, with certainty, I'm going to give this up by saying giving up my job. But then what I'm uncertain about is, oh, how much money am I going to make if I start this business? So then I need to then calculate what is the risk reward from a numerical perspective. Is that okay? Well, let's say if I commit 5 years into starting something on my own, then I believe I can make XYZ. Versus if I spend the next 5 years in my current job, this is what I'm able to make in terms of income. And at the end, it may not be that starting something on my own could make more than if I had stayed in a job. It's not about, oh, everything has to be better from a numerical perspective. But
Mm-hmm.
then once I quantify that, I say, oh, let's say I'm leaving like $200,000 on the table after 5 years if I took a risk to start something.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, it's kind of like a weighted average type of thing, right? It's okay, well, it's not just looking at one criteria strictly on money, but it goes to, again, if I think living my dream life, I'm going to give it like a 50% weighting. And
Okay.
then transforming myself, I'm going to give it a 30% weighting. And
Uh-huh.
then the financial aspect, I give it a 20% weighting. So that adds up to 100%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So like what score would I give myself in this case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus the other case would be like, oh, if I stay in my current job, living my dream life, I give it 50% weighting, but then I
Mm-hmm.
rate myself at a 2,
Okay.
right? And then
Mm-hmm.
transforming myself, I gave it 30% weighting, but I also gave it a 2. And then salary could be like, oh, salary certainty. Okay, fine, give it an 8, but that only gets 20% weighting. So it's different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So for me is that it's important, again, to understand what your values are. So once you know your values, you prioritize accordingly. And I can
Mm-hmm.
come up with this matrix of
Mm-hmm.
putting different weights on different criteria and get to a number to kind of calculate the risk.
Yeah.
So I hope that makes sense.
It does. I mean, there's something really refreshing in hearing that it wasn't about having every answer, but knowing what questions to ask yourself. Of course, as you said, knowing which goals you're reaching, how to get there, identifying the possible challenges or risk in this case, and quantifying them. Honestly, I think most of us are just looking for like a permission to be what, and your story offers that in spades, Anthony. You also work with high achieving professionals who
Mm,
ironically often feel trapped, obviously, because of their success, like what you've been through, the golden handcuffs, I must say. Why do you
yep.
think the more successful someone becomes, the harder it is to take bold career risks? And how do you help them actually get unstuck without throwing everything away?
Yep. That is a good question. And yeah, you mentioned a very good word. It's like golden handcuffs. And yeah, it's funny. If you remember the interview we did a
Yeah.
couple months ago on fire, it's like the the richer one person becomes, or more money one person has, that person actually feels less and less financially free, right?
Correct.
Which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
On this, yeah. So on this particular point is that because so people who are successful, they just tend to be more generally, they feel like, okay, I'm already in a comfortable state.
More
And
conservative.
yeah, you're comfortable, conservative, and usually when you're comfortable, you don't volunteer and raise your hand and be like, "Hey, I want to be uncomfortable." Right?
Hmm.
That's just not in our human nature,
Yeah.
and that's when we talk so much about always getting out of our comfort zone, right? And then once you do the cost benefit analysis, these people who are more successful tend to feel like, well, the the cost outweigh the benefit. So that's why you see younger people. They say, "Oh, younger people are more willing to take risks."
Bold.
I'm just making a general statement. I'm not saying that is always the case, but that's because younger people feel that they have less to lose, right? So the cost is lower.
Right. Hmm.
So how do we help some of these more successful people get unstuck? And that's what I do as a coach. So like some of the examples I would do is similar to what I said earlier in question one, is to redefine success for them. Because a lot of people are like, yes, I have all these things. What I can touch every day is tangible: money, title, respect. But then I need to first help them understand the why. Like why do you do what you do? What is the purpose?
Hmm.
Because a lot of people will feel like, okay, well, my current definition of success is, as I said, money, title, respect, versus the new definition of success could be, oh, well, by doing something else, if you transformed or made a change to your career, you could end up impacting 3,000 lives or something, or 30,000 lives. And
Multiplying.
then, yeah, like it is a different way of defining the success. So it's, oh, you're going to have direct impact on these people, and it'll give you a lot more meaning to once you make this pivot.
Yeah.
So number one is redefining success, and then number two is then figure out what they have to lose. So yes, in the current state, if I get out of my current state and try something else, I could give up on money, title, and the respect that I'm used to. So basically, I'm giving up on what I define as success. But then the new definition is, but if you didn't pursue something new, you're actually giving up the true meaning of life. So you're weighing like success versus true meaning of life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the other thing could be like, well, if I give up, or not give up, but if I change my current trajectory in my career, I could be leaving X dollars on the table per year.
Mm-hmm.
But the other way is, if you never try something new and never pivoted, you will always wonder the what if for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is this what if worth more, or is getting an answer to this what if worth more than X dollars, for example?
Mm-hmm.
So it's about kind of again, reframing the mindset of what is success to them, and until they're able to truly understand that, then yeah, it is difficult for them take that risk because the cost just outweigh the benefits. And so again, it's one of those you ask them to rate 1 to 10, right? Like how important is it to live a life with meaning? And most people will say they care about that a lot, right? And so I would say, how important is it to get answers to your what if questions? Again, I think most people who are senior or pretty successful, according to their definition, actually would care a lot about getting some of these questions answered.
Yeah.
Then I think the next thing is that let's say once they can kind of perceive and define success differently, and what's important is, as I also kind of mentioned earlier, is they need to have a clear plan going forward, because most successful people or people who are more senior, they kind of need to have a clear roadmap before they give something up. So like you need to understand that, okay, well, if you take this path, at the end, you're going to have the victory lap. And what is that victory lap going to look like for you? So it's important to actually frame that. And that's what a lot of my clients, I do with my clients. I have clients who are like 55, 60-year-old CEOs. And then I actually go back and ask them, I said, hey, go back and draw out what your victory lap looks like. Like, what does victory mean to you? Draw it out. And what does that celebration look like? Draw it out. And then we talk about it. And then next thing is, okay, well, but from here, the present moment to that victory lap, what are the checkpoints? What are the risks, for example? So how do we mitigate them? And then we list each one out. So it's kind of like if you're driving a car, going back to the example, okay, it's going to be bumpy, and maybe like, hey, there's no like mechanic in case something happens for the next like 150 kilometers. Well, maybe you would bring a spare tire, or you will make sure that you have filled up your gas tank to full before you embark on this, right? Because you already know what the risks or what the roadblocks are. So it's about really defining those up front. Yeah. And so that's how you go from being just taking risk or blind risk to what we call, again, calculated risk. It just becomes a lot more certain once that person can visualize all that. So now finally you can define risk as saying, like, rather than saying risk leads to some kind of a loss or sacrifice, you reframe it to say by not taking risk, you're losing something. Right? By not taking risk, you're sacrificing, giving up on something.
Yeah.
So you see kind of the reverse psychology.
Right. Well,
yeah. So that's yeah. So it's a little bit, yeah. That's again, it's how you kind of reframe the definition of success with people associate with always something positive, and risk is always something negative, right? But now you kind of reframe it as risk is something positive.
Taking the leap for success. I guess it's also about scaling yourself. I mean, your capabilities. And I like that your coaching, Anthony, invites people to climb the right ladder, even if it means taking a few steps down first.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I remember you've said before that risk becomes more manageable when we put structure around it, which sounds very comforting. But what does that actually look like in practice, Anthony? Can you walk us through an example of how that structure plays out in one of your coaching programs?
Okay. I'll give an example of training an analyst to become a portfolio manager in, say, the hedge fund space. This is what, right, this is kind of the journey I went through, and then this is what I help my clients do as well. So firstly is, the difference is analysts are those who make recommendations, and portfolio manager is the one who is actually putting on the risk. So it's like, I'm recommending you to do something, but I'm actually not the one necessarily putting money where my mouth is, but you will be the one making the decision to whether or not to pull the trigger. So making that transition is actually not easy. And what I do is I ask them, what is the hurdle? What's keeping them from making that leap or making them uncomfortable? Is it because they don't want their name to be listed next to a position? Let's say, let's say I bought Apple or something, and I'm the one buying Apple, then you have to put my name, Anthony, say, okay, Anthony's the one who bought Apple. So he's responsible for the outcome of this decision. So your name is next to it. Some people just don't feel comfortable with that. They're just now in the spotlight. And then there's the risk of saying like, well, what if the position is too small? Let's say you're supposed to have $100, but you only put like $5 in it. And then that's such a small position. If it goes up, then there's the risk of being too small. Oh, but there's also risk of too big, too large. Oh, of 100, I put $30 in it and it goes against you. Then why is it so large? So there's a risk of this sizing too big, sizing too small. You could also risk being too early, risk being too late. So risk is everywhere in that sense. So I need to understand like exactly what's holding you back from making that decision.
Okay.
So that's kind of the first step. Again, it's always understanding the why, not so much just the how. And then once you know the why, then you kind of understand, okay, well, we're not going to go into this blind. And then the next thing is, okay, once you understand what's really holding them back, it could just be like, oh, I'm just afraid that it may lose money. And then everyone's going to blame me. I'll be humiliated. And that's actually one of the very common fear why people they don't want to take the risk, say, in the investment world. But then you identify that, the next thing goes back to, as I said, the risk management. What will happen from now until, say, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now? So you help the person pave that path out early, and then you quantify the risk. Is it like, oh, well, let's say if I buy Apple today at May 6th, 2025, I expect it to make, the likelihood of it making money is I expect it'll go up 30% versus the risk of it losing 10% is not very high. So to me, that's like a ratio of what I call like 3-to-1. So 30 upside, 10 downside, 3-to-1 ratio. It could be like 40% upside, 10% downside. So that's a 4-to-1 ratio. So of course, the higher the ratio, the better, because then the chances of making money outweigh the chances of losing money. So that's kind of how you quantify a risk. And then there could be things what we call like, and I have to speak to the client and be like, well, what other risk can we identify that we cannot mitigate after doing whatever we can? And those are what we call like residual risk, the leftover risk. So for example, like natural disaster, it could be like, oh, well, it could be a hurricane that could destroy certain things, and then we would end up losing money. But we have absolutely no control over that. There's nothing we can do. So it's either you accept it or you don't. Right? So yeah, there's really no mitigate for that. So because you list out everything you have to mitigate, and these are like the leftover risk. There's no mitigate. You accept it or not. So once you kind of quantify the risk reward, then I help the analyst visualize the path to making money, which is very important, because to get from A to B is not going to be a straight line. It's going to be very, could be curvy, wavy, whatever, like circuitous. I mean, look at stock charts, right? No stock price ever goes straight. Right? Stock price is always, it goes up, it comes back down, goes up, comes back down. But yeah, a lot of volatility as we see it, right? And so it's important to lay that out, visualize, and whenever, let's say it goes against you, let's say, Apple stock is down after you buy it, do you freak out? Or is this something that, okay, I expected this to happen, or I mentally prepare myself that when it loses money, these are the checkpoints I need to go through, which is like, I need to understand why it's down for whatever reason. This is the process I already have in place to assess the situation at that time. And so visualizing that is important. I think a lot of people in general in life, they just don't visualize enough the path to success or the path to making money. They just assume like, okay, once I do this, I close my eyes and then I'm gonna open and then everything is good.
Yeah.
It's never like that. That's why that visualizing the path to success and making money is extremely important.
Mm.
And then the last thing is then to take action. So another part of being a very structured way of helping people take risk is to start small. It's not to say I'm just going to plunge right in, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
if you're going from an analyst to a portfolio manager, instead of giving you tomorrow like, oh, here's $50 million to manage, you'd be like, okay, let's start with maybe 3 million, 4 million, and then start small. Let them assess the feeling of now finally managing that amount of capital, which is all under their names, or they're accountable fully for this amount of money. And
Mm-hmm.
then you reassess how they feel along the way. And then let's say, oh, well, today I'm managing like $3 million. And then you go for like a few months. How do you feel? Say, oh, no, I actually feel pretty comfortable. Even when things went against me, I knew what was going on. I did not panic. Okay, well, let's give you a little bit more now. Say from 3 million to 6 million.
Yeah.
And then again, how do you feel now taking more risk or be responsible for more money, right?
Mm.
So that's how you grow to taking more and more risk, because that process of risk taking actually is very similar, almost the same from managing 5 million versus
Uh-huh.
managing 50 million,
Right.
right? But it's the psyche of say more digits
Mm-hmm.
that will really freak out the person, right? So that's why it's about applying the process and
Mm-hmm.
programming your brain and practice that repeatedly. And
Wow.
then you just have to reassess along the way,
Right.
because there could be new risks that you just didn't know. So that's why there's the phrase, you don't know what you don't know, right? And it's actually really those moments that matter most, is that what happens when you encounter something completely new that you did not anticipate or you could not anticipate, and then how do you react to that? So
Uh,
that is also the process of a structured way of helping somebody really know how to take risk more
mhm.
comfortably.
Mhm. And that framework, Anthony, seems gold. It's like giving someone emotional scaffolding while they build a
Mm-hmm.
version of themselves. So from now on, I'll take more time to visualize enough the road to success. Because risk indeed isn't reckless, but rather, as you said, rehearsed, reflected on, and reframed by asking the whys. And I think that makes it so much less terrifying. So let's bring this home with a real world story, Anthony. What's one recent transformation you've witnessed, maybe from a client of yours, where embracing risk led to a breakthrough? And what can all of us learn from that moment of courage?
Yeah. So one example would be I have a couple of clients who are like, oh, uh, I want to be a business owner.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and then but at the same time, they're very scared to say, oh, I'm just going to quit my job and own my own business
Mhm.
for a lot of reasons I mentioned earlier, like the cost benefit analysis. So firstly is I need to understand exactly, so why do you want to be a business owner, and why do you think leaving your job is the only way to be a business owner? So we
Okay.
go through a lot of the exercises. It's about fishing for values. What do you prioritize most in life? They're like, oh, I want the freedom, I want to make more money, I just want to feel like I'm achieving more in life, type of thing, right? So understanding the why, that's very important. And then we talk about things like, oh, but then at the end of the day, they have to be practical, because they're like, oh, I'm the only breadwinner, I have 3 children, so at the end of the day, money matters a lot to me. So how do we? But so they're like, well, I can't really take the risk of giving all that up to pursue my why. So that's kind of like the whole backdrop. And then when I then work with them on the risk, or the to achieve the why, I say, well, sometimes you can look at some of the mitigants, right? For
Mhm.
example, the risk was giving up a proper paycheck to do
Yeah.
something else. Well, the mitigant could be, hey, you actually don't have to quit your job and you can still be a business owner. That's
Mm.
one option, right? The mitigant is, okay, well, without risking my career, I can actually keep my job and just be an owner of a business and still have this side hustle and side income,
Mm-hmm.
which many people actually, yeah, they feel like it's mutually exclusive. Either I have my job or I cannot be a business owner, which means I can only give up my job to become a business owner, which is not true. So I kind of reframed that. I mean, that's actually a risk that we have kind of just mitigated away. That's not even a risk of losing the income.
Yeah.
Because they can actually keep their job.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but then the next thing is, well, I might risk losing money then because I've never been a business owner and I've never really done XYZ, etc.
Okay.
So then I asked them, I said, well, look, there's definitely a risk because you've never done it, but can you find somebody or work with somebody who's done it?
Mm-hmm.
So do you think if you find the right partner, somebody who has been doing it for a while to work with you,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that's going to be a lot less risky?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it goes from being just not familiar with something to now saying like, look, I'm not familiar, but at least somebody else is that I can depend on. So again, that's like a mitigant to venturing to something new with no prior experience. But hey, I mitigated that by finding the right partner to work with me. So then they feel like, oh, okay, well, now the chances of losing money is a lot lower because number one, I can still have my job.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, then I have a partner I can work with.
Someone
So I think
fill
it's
the
very,
gap.
very high level. Sorry?
Someone who could help him fill the gap.
Yeah, fill the gap. Yeah. So this is just a very, very high level thing. So it's again, it's like also reframing the fact that people just feel like if I take a risk, there's only kind of one path to follow.
Yeah.
But actually, there are many different paths to take. Once before you take on the risk, you need to know there's actually still multiple scenarios and many ways to help you overcome that risk. It's not just doing it on your own. And I think a big issue, let's say with this client, was that the idea of having a partner or even just hiring someone to help them buy a business just never existed because they just feel like, oh, I have to do everything on my own.
Yeah.
But then once they realize like, oh, there are actually other options, other people I can depend on, they realize like, oh, it's not even a risk in the first place.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a very high level way of helping some clients think about, you can say, risk differently. And then at the same time, allows them to achieve their why.
I see. Well, thank you for sharing that story, Anthony. I always say success stories are nice, but transformation stories, those are the ones that change people and their life. That moment of, I don't know if I can do this, followed by maybe doing it anyway. That's actually what greatness looks like in real time. And a conversation, Anthony. Thank you again for being here. You always manage to bring a rare mix of strategy and courage to each of our episodes. And everyone lives a little braver for it. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Miles, as always.
Thank you. We appreciate you as always. Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks, Miles.
If I could stitch together one big takeaway from our conversation with Anthony, it's that risk doesn't need to be feared. It needs to be actually understood. And with the right mindset, structure, and maybe a coach like Anthony in your corner, it becomes the path to freedom and not fear. So go learn more about Anthony's coaching programs or just get inspired by what Institute for Greatness offers. Check out ifgreatness.com. Thank you guys for tuning in wherever you are. You're the reason Xraised keeps airing powerful, purpose-packed episodes like this one. Don't forget, the biggest risk is not taking one at all. See you again next time. This has been your host, Miles. Stay focused and inspired with Xraised.